Welcome. I'm Zach. Thanks for the introduction, Josh. You're amazing. You are. My whole talk is just about Josh. It's a whole lie. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the history of Ruby, the standard library, and what might be, maybe, and where things are at. My slides are cut off. Starting off with a bang. There we go. Okay. So I'm going to show you 3 libraries that I've picked from the standard library. One of them is druby. Another one's RDoc and Fiddle, as you can read. I hope you can read that. And the title is Standing on the Shoulders of Giants. Why I decided on this title basically because it sounds witty. And really it is. I give myself credit. Here we go. So this is my first time in Australia. Pretty excited. There's a lot of amazing Rubyists here, and kind of shocking that there's such a great community here, and it's so, like, the core is good. I've met a number of you in other places, but it's nice to now be here on your soil and hang out with you and stuff. So, slide. Is this going to happen the whole time? What's the problem? Holman, help me out. I mean, you plug it in and it sets it automatically. You did? Yeah, but that's not full screen, bro. Hey! Okay. Thank you. Okay. So the last talk was kind of interesting, and it gave me a lot of material because I didn't really prepare this talk very well. I was kind of like up late and had a really not so great day yesterday. But all that aside, I think it's really important to think about where we might be going in Ruby, and that was a great indicator of things that we should work on and things that maybe we need to focus on as a community. And he made a really great point that the actual core people that have influence on these changes is very small, but as a group, we can make a huge difference. I also like that he mentioned Bundler, and Andre's here, and Bundler's awesome. There's a few other Bundler people here too. This is basically Bundler's ZachConf, I've decided. Holman's up next, and his mom's here. That's awesome. So what am I getting at? So right now, literally anyone in here can write a library for Ruby. They can push it to Ruby Gems, and within like a few seconds, millions of people can download your code, install it, and have it right on their computer. And that's really, really amazing if you think about it, how far we've come. With Bundler, with literally one command and a gem file, you can install hundreds of libraries onto your computer with one command after several hours of resolving. But we're getting there, and it's amazing. I don't know where we're getting, like what the point is, where we're actually going to go, but I don't really think anyone does. We're just going to keep working at it and see where we go, see what we can get done. And that's really inspiring. But with that, we have to think about where we've been, right? All these tools we have are great and make our lives way easy, but there's definitely been a time where we didn't have these luxuries. Even before Ruby, when you're just writing C and stuff. How does packaging work when you're dealing with compiled libraries? A lot of this has been solved with Ruby and with Ruby gems. There was a time where we didn't have Ruby gems. And what we had to do was pass around libraries to each other over the internet. Kind of like what gems is doing, right? But in a much less efficient way. We had this guy. This is Minoru Aoki-san, who is the author of the Ruby Hacking Guide, if you don't know him. And he also wrote setup.rb. Now what setup.rb did was it allowed you to have a program or a library and gave you a bunch of like helper methods and stuff so that you could easily install a program on your computer. If any of you know Python, they had a similar thing where you had to do like Python setup.py or whatever it was, install.py. In every library, we had to do this. We had no automation. You had to download the library, run this file. Also, before that, we had, sorry, my slides, I'm bad right now. This is terrible. So before that, we had RAA. This is how we didn't have rubygems.org. We had the Ruby Application Archive, which is basically a wiki that you attached a link to like a tarball of your library, and people would just download it manually and then run the setup file. We didn't have like servers in the cloud running all these crazy Puppet scripts to set up our server instances so that we can just deploy Ruby gems and push our code and install it on the entire network. You had to do all this manually. And we're talking like 17 years ago, right? Like this wasn't like yesterday. Setup.rb was first released 17 years ago, and the Ruby Application Archive started 16 years ago, like shortly after. Once we had like the installer, like great, now how do we pass this around? So that was created. And then just recently, the archive went down because that box was lost. So it's kind of sad to see it go, but it's interesting to see where we've come from and where we're going. All because of that guy. So the reason why we have the Ensnared Library is because of this was such a huge burden on developers, right? Finding some wiki, trusting that the tarball worked. If they included a checksum, maybe you could run that and verify that it was what you're looking for. Maybe you had that person's key. All this stuff was done manually. And so what they did was they included a bunch of these awesome libraries that everyone could use into Ruby and package it with them. And it's still going strong. There's, like Mark Bates was saying in his talk yesterday, Minitest is still included in Ruby. And the 3 that I'm going to show you are still included in Ruby and still are useful today and are interesting things you can work with. Now, this isn't going to be a talk about best practice libraries that we have in Ruby. Some of this stuff is just plain useless, to be quite frank. But it's cool, and I want to share it with you. So the first one that I have is druby. It was written by this guy about 10 years ago. And it started as a plugin for like the original WebRick servlet in Ruby. He wanted a way to distribute code and commands over the network, and so he wrote druby as a plugin, and it just went from there. There's a great book on it. I think it's literally called the druby book, and it's on pragmatic programmers. I think there's another one out there. I can't remember the name. I think Mark Bates wrote it. something. So what I want to build, I'm actually going to build something, put that aside, is a chat server with druby. And first time I thought of doing this, I thought it would be great if we could all connect and do it. And it sounds like really fun, but actually you can't do that. Because of the net, I tried it earlier, the network here is flaky, and like ports are blocked or something on the router, so we can't do it. And also you would be connecting to this machine, and God only knows what you're capable of. So all right, let's do this. I'm going to start out with druby. I'm going to write my server first. And basically what this thing's going to do is accept connections over the network and distribute messages to all the connections. Very simple. I'm going to use a class so that druby and can connect to the objects remotely over the network. So we have messages and we have users. When we initialize this thing, can't spell, messages are just going to do that. Just create a hash for both of those. And then when we actually accept a connection, we're going to add a user object to our hash table. And what that's going to look like is users. Actually, we want the remote connection too. And remote. Now I'll show you what the client is going to look like next, but basically what we want is initialize a new client with this remote connection and store it. But we also want to return that thing so we can call methods on it. So we get our client instance back, and I'll show you. Just allows us to call methods on it once we have the connection open. And then we want to distribute messages over TCP. So we have our remote connection again, and we distribute this message here. Something like this. I need to set up the username, so when I get that connection back, I can just call the username method. User is a very basic object, just literally has a username and can just write strings to the screen. I'll show you that in a second. But that's the basic idea of our server. Like not even 20 lines of code, and we can handle connections and distribute messages using druby. Now there is no actual druby in this class, which is interesting, but that is actually going to be implemented in the client handling the server connection. So let's write our client, and this is where we actually require DRB. And we want to require that server thing I just wrote. So our client class is going to do it's just going to do set up our connection. So we do this server and remote. store the username in here too. Okay. Now, in the client's actually the class that we initialize that connects into the server. So when we want to distribute the message, we have to actually pass that back to the class that I just wrote. So we have the message is actually just like a chat message, right? So distribute. Yeah, so we take the remote and then pass the message in. And then that's it. We also want to implement this one. So we're going to do, also takes a message, right? Just took a string right there. So we're going to do server dot, remote say message. Now we actually need to connect the DRB instance. So using start service, we have to pass it the URI. So I can do this and a port. And we want to initialize this server object. And then we just want to join the threads. So what start service does is you give it a URI and it just starts listening on this address. Something tells me you can just pass nil and actually just it uses some underlying like DRB like Unixy thing to just like determine the default port and address for running druby on Linux or Unix systems. But just for sanity's sake, I'm going to do it this way. And then so the user thing's really simple. We'll just do that real quick. It's literally just a user class with plain old Ruby object with a username. There's 2 S's in that. And we just set it on the initializer. And then we just want to put out messages. Oops. Say message. This is not exactly the most complicated Ruby I've ever written in my life, but it gets the job done. So here comes the fun part. This is where we actually write the chat itself. We have all these classes in place and these services now, and they're all connected. Now we need to actually initialize the chat and do some talking. So I need to require DRB again. And I also want that user class. So basic Ruby, what's your name? And then we just do username gets.chomp. So now we have the username. That's simple. We want to start up DRB again. And we want to initialize the remote connection. So DRB object.new. I think we pass in the URI. And the object is no. Oops. So this thing takes two parameters. The second one is the URI, same scenario. And the first one is the local object. So because we're going to be talking to remote objects, we're not going to store anything locally on the actual chat, just using the main server node and connecting to that and storing the objects there. One thing I forgot to add to client was this. And what this basically says is store these objects on the server. And when talking over connections about this object, just pass like a reference of it. Don't try to pass the whole object or any of its data. Just pass a reference of it, and then make changes and connect. My user should have that too. It doesn't. It's not funny. You guys don't make typos? No? Wait, you use Emacs? Oh, that's okay. We are recording this talk, right? So macro it up, bro. All right, next thing is client. Pass in that username. I think I need the remote. Let's check. No, that was in the server. Yeah, just the remote. Okay. I'm just going to go with it. I don't even know if this is going to work, to be quite honest. All right. Some magic. Let's make it work. So using Ruby, I'm going to start up the client first. And then I'm going to go in druby and try to connect to chat. I'm Zach. And it fails. Undefined method username. I didn't add a username. I didn't, did I? Thanks, Keiko. You're my favorite. Wait, what line was it on? Help me out here. Okay, got it. Where's the username go? I did add user. I passed the remote. Shh, I got it. Okay. Okay. Nope. Client RB, let's do that. Bro, I know. No, this is what I have before. Yeah, see? This is the working copy. I'm just gonna cheat. Looks good. I didn't initialize user. Who said that? You win. You win. Okay. Okay. Woo! Yay! All right, DRuby's done. Made it. Running low on time, so I got to do this quick. No more interruptions. All right. All right, next one is RDoc by this guy. Actually, he's just the maintainer currently. This is Eric Hodel. He's awesome. He got me into Ruby core. He knows a lot of stuff. If you ever have any problems, he will help you if I can't. Dr. Brain, he's amazing. So the thing I want to show you with RDoc is a Markdown Parser. And actually, because it's in Ruby, it's written in pure Ruby. It has to be. Which the great thing about this is it comes with one now. As of RDoc 4, has a Markdown Parser. So this one's much simpler. I always get in so much hell in DRuby. It's just so complicated. This one's much easier. I'm going to write it as if it was our discount. So it has a similar API where you just initialize Markdown object and pass some text and call to HTML. Literally 15-ish lines of code, and I have a Markdown parser. So the way I want to do this is I want to read from standard input and just read out a Markdown file to HTML so I can show you real quick. So to do that, I'll initialize a new Markdown and pass in standard input. And then just output to HTML, real simple. So hey Charlie, is the Ruby README in RDoc or Markdown yet? It's still in RDoc. Yeah, never mind. I'll use Rails. So if I call this README in Rails, right? It's just a RDoc file. So if we then pipe that to this, it outputs HTML. We can take it a step further and save that to an HTML file, and then open index.html, and we can see the Rails README in HTML, formatted by RDoc. That easy. And that one was much faster. So round of applause. This next one's going to be a trick, but how much time do I have? 2 minutes? Great, let's do it. Sorry, Holman. Sorry, Holman's mom. Love you. Okay. All right, Fiddle. This is an amazing library. Originally started out as an extension for DL, which is how we used to link libraries for extensions in Ruby. DL is a really old, crufty way of linking libraries at low level and talking to them in different languages. So many years pass, speed up, FFI comes along, and that's much more standardized, and libFFI is a much better implementation. And so what we did was we bridged this gap between the old DL API, which we had, and FFI, and Aaron wrapped it as Fiddle. So voila. It's great. The thing about Fiddle is you can talk, right? So you can talk to other languages. You can talk to other libraries. And what I've decided to do is, if I have enough time, get through this, is talk to Dylan, which is a language that I really like. I don't have a lot of time to discuss exactly what it does, but it's basically a statically compiled language that's purely object-oriented, kind of like Smalltalk, but different. The way Dylan came about was Apple started it as an experimentation to use on the Newton platform. Turns out the Newton sucks, and they just dropped the language. Now, like, fast forward a few years, Carnegie Mellon University rewrote the compiler in a Unix standard, and now there's the Open Dylan implementation, which carries on, and there's a bunch of amazing code and libraries and people working on this, all on GitHub. So you can read about it on opendylan.org, and you can go to the GitHub and see all the awesome code. I'm going to write something really basic just to show you. So it takes two integers, and it's going to return an integer. Literally, A plus B. This is what we're doing. And so to make this callable from C, I've also loaded the CFFI extension from Dylan, and I'll be linking that as well. So in order to use that from C, we have to do this wrapper function. And it gives us some types, the module does. That's one of them. So because we have to represent A, B, and C, this is actually the result. And then we're going to give it a name that we can access, just adder. That simple. Really basic code, just defining some functions and defining a wrapper for C for that function. Now, I'm going to compile this real quick, so hope you still have a minute. And while that's going, I can show you the Fiddle implementation. In Ruby, you know what? Attach function, libfiddle, which is the thing I just wrote. And we're going to attach the adder function. It's going to take two integers, right? as arguments, and it's going to return one single integer. So we can then do 2 plus 2 equals Dylan.adder 2 and 2. See if this is finished compiling. It has. So before I run this, well, fuck it, I'm just going to run it. Yeah. That's weird. I'm sorry? No, it's adder. See? It did actually compile. Yeah. Well, you know what I can do? I can cheat some more. No, I can't, actually. I'm not even, I'm terrible at this. And I'm out of time. Well, the other thing I will show you then, this should run. That's perfectly good-looking code. That's what it would look like if you were to do this. And it would just put out 2 plus 2 equals 4. We don't need the result. You get the idea. This thing is really cool. So it's adapted from a little gist that Aaron wrote, and it just gives you like a similar API as the FFI gem itself. So you just pass it in some libraries, it opens them using the DL-open function, and then turns the parameters into an actual Fiddle type that it talks to over C, and then just initializes the function with the handle and returns that function as a class method. Very simple, very awesome. If you get a chance, play with Fiddle, play with Ruby, play with Dylan, play with yourself, who cares? And that's all I have.
Although Zach likes to run over, I have time for one question in 140 characters or less. Mm-hmm. Any questions for Mr. Zach? Thanks. Well, okay. Thank you very much. Okay.
Oh.
When you move into a new neighborhood, do you have to register the neighbors?
And thank you very much, Mark, for that question. Thank you, Zach.